Welcome everyone to today's class. Today's class is on Freya's Unusual Wedding, written by Neil Gaiman, translated from the Eddas. It will be quite interesting. We all know Thor. Thor the mighty, Thor the brave, Thor the strongest. But what we don't know, or what we hear very little of, is the time that Thor, dressed as Freya, for a very peculiar wedding. Now imagine, if you will, mighty Thor, sleeping comfortably in his hall, awaking, reaching for his hammer and finding that it was not there. Mjolnir, his most treasured gift, was nowhere to be seen. Thor, being Thor, did the first thing that he always does. He asked himself, did Loki do this? Giving it some thought, he decided that it couldn't have been Loki. For even Loki would not mess with the hammer of Thor. So he thought again, what should he do? And again, he thought of Loki. Because Loki is the one who would definitely be able to find out what was going on. Because as troublesome as Loki is often well versed in the ways of such mischief. So he went to Loki, and he asked Loki not to tell anyone. But he told Loki that his hammer was missing. And even Loki noticed that this was not an easy matter. This was not something that could be swept under the rug. Even Loki knew that this meant trouble. So Loki quickly ran to Freya and asked Freya for her cloak that allowed her to fly, one of her treasured possessions. Of course, she denied him this request until Loki told her what had happened. And she immediately gave the cloak to Loki, so that Loki could fly. And Loki flew off towards Jotunheim to see what was going on. As he flew, he quickly came across an ogre, a very large ogre. The ogre was making collars and placing them on hounds. As Loki landed, the ogre asked, what news did Loki bring? Did he bring news from the gods and the elves? And Loki said that it was neither good news from the gods nor the elves. That the hammer of Thor had been stolen. And the ogre said he knew who stole the hammer, that it was him, Tyrim, Lord of the Ogres, and that he had placed the hammer 6 miles underground, where it could never be retrieved, in a secret place known only to him, and that Odin and all the gods would never be able to find it. Loki immediately offered ransom, told him we could give you gold and gems. He said no. He does not want for either of those. The only thing he wanted was the hand of the most beautiful goddess in all of Asgard. He wanted Freya's hand. He told Loki to return in 8 days with Freya to be his bride, or they would lose the hammer. Loki quickly returned to Asgard. Before he could even set foot on the ground, Thor asked, what has happened to my hammer? What news have you heard? Because Thor knew that it did not take Loki long to plot. Loki lands, and Loki tells Thor exactly what was told to him. He tells him that it is only the hand of Freya in marriage that will bring back his hammer. So they approach Freya. They tell Freya what has transpired and what the price was. And they immediately assume that Freya will marry the ogre and tell Freya that she must go grab her bridal gown and that she must be ready to marry. And Freya shakes, and the anger rises in Freya, and the hall shakes, and her cats leap from the ground and start hissing and running. And Freya, in the angriest voice you could imagine, says, "I will do no such thing. You think I am so easy that I will just go and marry this ogre to get you two out of trouble?" And she throws them out of her hall. Thor decides that it is best to convene with the gods and figure this out. And he seeks their counsel, and they all have ideas. Each one shot down decided that it would not work. They ask Heimdall. He who sees the farthest, he who hears the best. Tell us what you would have us do. Heimdall says he has a plan, but they won't like it. And everyone says, "We'll like it. We'll like the plan. Tell us the plan." And he says, "I don't think you'll like it." And Thor slams his fist on the ground and says, "Tell us the plan, and if it's good, we'll like it." So Heimdall says, "No, you won't like it." And Heimdall tells them that they dress Thor in a wedding dress, drape keys around his waist, and cover his face with a wedding veil. And Thor immediately says he does not like it. But all the gods agree that this is the best plan they have. So Freya and Sif and all the women and all the handmaids of Asgard get together, and they immediately start dressing up Thor. And you can imagine that Thor is quite unhappy with this situation. Having to wear a dress, having to travel in this garb. And for every part that people are all like, "Well, what of this?" they have an idea of a way to fix it. And Loki transforms himself magically into a woman and proclaims himself to be a handmaiden of Freya and says that he will get them there. He will get them through it. So they board the chariot drawn by Grinder and Snarler, and they go to the land of the giants. They arrive at Tyrum's hall, and it is a foul-smelling place. There's horse shit and cow shit all over the ground, and they are running around placing straw over it so that the goddess Freya does not have to smell it or see it. Tyrum's sister comes to greet Freya and sees Freya and doesn't think much of Freya. This figure does not impose that of a beautiful goddess. Her brother must surely be mad. Something is wrong with his head. But all the same, they are led into the hall and they are seated. And Tyrum, who wishes to sit next to Freya, his bride, is sat instead next to Loki in disguise, for it's the custom that Loki says. And as they sit, food is brought to the tables. Mead, oxen, roast meats of all kinds, and trays upon trays of dainty little pastries for the women. And Thor immediately eats an entire plate of the pastries, a whole oxen of his own, several salmon, and kegs of mead. To which Tyrum says, "I cannot believe that this woman has eaten so much." And Loki, thinking quickly and on his feet, says, 8 days 8 days she has thought of nothing but being with you. She has not eaten, she has not slept for 8 days for fear of loss of her passion. Ready to meet you, Tiram. Which seems to please Tiram. And they continue on, and Tiram, after a while, decides he wants to try and kiss his bride, Freya. And as he approaches, he sees the eyes behind the veil. Behind it, he sees the eyes of the fire, the rageful, angry eyes of Thor. For Thor sees Tiram and sees the thief that took his precious Mjolnir and stole from him and the gods. So Tiram jumps back, fearful of what he has seen, and he tells Loki, Why are Freya's eyes filled with such fire and hate? Such anger and rage? The fire there, no woman should ever possess. And Loki says, 'Tis the passion for 8 days and 8 nights. Freya has thought of nothing but being with you. Her passion has grown over those 8 days after first hearing that you wished to marry her. So Tiram goes, then we mustn't wait. We must hurry. We must let her experience her passions, for I am fearful of the look in her eyes. And he sends his men to go grab the precious treasure Mjolnir. And it takes several of these giant ogres to even lift it and carry it. And as they carry it, they place it on Freya's lap. And as Tiram starts to boast about Freya, his beautiful wife, and how he longs to be with her, Thor grasps the familiar handle of Mjolnir, lifts it up with one hand, rips off the veil, and exposes himself as Thor, mightiest of the gods, reunited with his mighty weapon, and in one swing cleaves Tiram's head right off his shoulders. And he went about and he slayed every ogre present there. Each and every one of them fell to Mjolnir, to Thor's rage, and at the end of it, Loki, who had changed himself back into himself, stood next to Thor, who wore nothing but the shards of a dress that he had torn off in rage, looked over, and at Loki he said, I think we should go home. And they returned with Mjolnir back in its rightful hands.